You know, with all this talk of spending and the budget and no real need to balance the budget, so it seems, we want to know what happened to that party of fiscal conservatives. Remember them? Well, the deficit hawks are up in arms after the president released his $4 trillion budget plan this week, and days after Congress passed a $400 billion spending plan and the $1.5 trillion tax cuts.
The swamp won and the American taxpayer lost. And here's the frustrating thing. We were so poised to win. 3 weeks ago, we sent a bill to the Senate. Chuck Schumer shut down the government, didn't pay our troops because he said amnesty was more important. Our leadership said, no, no, no. Let's do what Washington always does. Let's just spend more on everything. Let's just grow government, give in to the Democrats instead of fight and stand firm and do what the people elect us to do.
Joining me right now, Republican Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona. Congressman, is Jim Jordan right?
Yeah, I think he is right. And the people that I talked to over the weekend after that bill passed, they're incensed. They're outraged. I'm outraged. And quite frankly, there's a reason to be outraged. There's no way we should have lost this battle. And to think that we're ballooning this deficit, this structural deficit for the year. We're ballooning our national debt, and it's all unsustainable, and it all could be avoided and should have been avoided in this most recent round.
Why wasn't it?
No one knows that yet. I mean, the Senate's going to claim that they have that 60-vote rule and they couldn't get 60 votes. Well, my position would be then change the rule to get 51 votes, but pass something that's fiscally responsible for the American people. Don't keep digging this hole. We've reached the bottom. It's time to stop digging and start filling it in.
You know, it's interesting because you think about the Tea Party movement, which was really based on this idea that, we needed more fiscal responsibility in Washington, and we completely lacked it. But then you look at the success of Donald Trump, and, he's had some wonderful economic policies that he's put into place with the less regulation, tax reform, not perfect. I've kind of made my peace with that, as the viewer well knows. Not perfect, but helpful. And yet, he's someone who hasn't ever really worried about debt. In fact, he's made a career off of using debt to his advantage. Maybe he's not as interested. And so is it causing some Republicans to kind of rethink their traditional view of debt as bad?
Well, it's certainly not in the echo chamber that I work with here, not with my constituents. We want that debt to go away. We want the deficit to go away. You can't be at 110% of your GDP to debt ratio and hope for long-term economic viability. I mean, another 10 points there, we're going to become Greece. And,
right, but let me ask you this. Are you willing to make those hard choices and say, okay, well, we can't do tax reform right now because we can't afford it?
Well, I think that, I think the tax reform has given us some great growth in the economy, which is going to give us long-term tax benefits. It's a spending problem. We just had record revenue each of the last 4 months, but in only one of those months did we actually cover our spending. And the rest of the time, we've dug the hole another $80 to $100 billion. So I'm okay with the tax cuts, but if you're going to cut the tax, for Pete's sakes, let's also cut the spending. Our problem is spending. We're profligate.
Yeah, I remember getting into this argument with Obama's chief of economic advisors because he saw this as, in other words, if GDP was growing, the economy was growing, then you needed to have spending grow just as much. And if it didn't grow just as much, even if it's growing, then it was actually a cutback in spending. And I almost think that, look, we ought to be willing to cut back in spending, and we don't need to index for inflation our spending, right? Just because the economy is growing doesn't mean we need to spend that much more. It's like a family, right? That if you're fortunate enough to make some extra money one year, do you completely change your spending habits and, live to the max? No, you try and rein that spending in. But that takes a lot of will.
Yeah, I mean, we have long-range things as families that we care about. It may be college, it may be retirement. So if we get more money in the year, we're not out there buying and just spending. Instead of going to McDonald's, we're going to some high-end restaurant. We don't do that. We budget according to long-range plans. Here, we don't seem to have long-range plans. And so, I mean, what you described,
a two-year plan, a 2-year and a 6-year plan, and a 4-year plan. I mean, it's get elected, get elected, get elected.
Yeah, I don't buy into any of that 2, 4, 6, 8, give them, who do we appreciate type of thing. We really need to be cutting spending. I mean, I'm a supply side guy. I believe reducing taxes and regulations is going to stimulate the economy, and we're going to get more tax revenue. The other side that keeps saying, well, let's keep increasing spending, they're Keynesian at heart. They are demand side. They believe that if you spend more in the economy, that somehow that's going to build it up. I just don't buy into that. I've never seen it work.
I don't either.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even need to be political in my view, because JFK cut taxes, right? This doesn't have to be a partisan issue. But, you need to give as much money to the people and let them spend it accordingly, as opposed to putting more and more into the hands of government. So I'm all for that. I hope you guys are able to do some work on this, Congressman.
We'll keep pushing.